Our next speaker is Dr. Tilman Becker, who is the CEO of TC Becker Consult and until very recently the director of Gambling Research Center at the University of Hohenheim. Tilman Becker will tell us more about the responsible gaming elements of the German online gambling regulatory framework. As we all know, responsible gaming is a huge part of the new German regulation, and Dr. Becker will tell us more about this. Tilman, we are very happy to have you here in Berlin. Welcome.
Okay, thank you, Willem, for inviting me, and welcome you all here. At least all German people will know me because I was head of the Gambling Research Center for 15 years, and we are organizing every year a big conference, the largest conference in Germany, largest gambling conference in Germany. And you can come to the next symposium. It's called 15-16 of March. We will have a big symposium again. Last year there were about 400 people coming to this symposium, and I think it's fair to say that it is the largest conference in Germany on gambling, and everybody comes there. It's organized by the University of Hohenheim, and politicians come there, administration, lawyers, companies, and so on, and even the help people, responsible gaming people come there, and everybody comes there basically. Ask your German friends how the symposium is, and they will tell you about it. Anyway, now I'm presenting something on the responsible gambling in Germany. The most important objective of the interstate treaty of gaming is to prevent the occurrence of gaming and betting addiction and to create the preconditions for an effective addiction control. You must understand that the importance of preventing gambling addiction in German law has its basic or is due to the justification of the traditional monopoly regime of each of the German states by, and you know this probably if you are from the legal side, by overriding reasons in the public interest. Limitations to the freedom to provide services can only be justified if they are imposed for reasons of public order, public security, or public health, or if they are imposed for overriding reasons in the public interest. In German, zwingende Gründe des Allgemeininteresses, including not only addiction prevention, but as well combating fraud and crime and money laundering. In Germany, this is important as well to understand. In Germany, each of the 16 states is responsible for public order. And gambling is part or belongs to public order, and therefore each state is responsible. Each state is as well responsible for police and education. Therefore, you have different school regimes in the 16 different states. You have different police cars and different police uniforms in the different 16 states, because this is the only thing that a state can do by themselves, police and education. The state of Schleswig-Holstein has taken advantage of this by having its own gambling regulation from 2012 on before joining now the other states in the interstate treaty of gaming 2021. Gambling law is regarded as part of the police law and as such falls into the responsibilities of each state. And therefore we have the 16 states responsible. Furthermore, you must understand, and that is what Brigitte told you, you have to look behind what politicians think. And it is important to understand that the interstate treaty is a compromise between the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats. Along the lines the price for opening the internet for slots and casino games are, from the SPD Social Democrat side, responsible gambling measures. It was a compromise. And therefore, the result you look at, if you look at the interstate treaty, is a compromise between mainly the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats. Accordingly, the new state treaty differentiates between those very dangerous games which have to connect to the central bearing system or the central exclusion system or the self-exclusion system. Sometimes in Germany there are terms used in the interstate treaty which are not common in English. And for example, the central barring system I haven't heard before. I have only heard of self-exclusion or exclusion systems. The central limit file, another topic, and the activity file preventing parallel gambling. And these files, they were part of this compromise between the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats. These are the new measures, and it's important as well to know that these are not the only measures for responsible gambling. We have a lot of measures foreseen in the interstate treaty in paragraph Article 6 and Article 7. The most important is that minors should be excluded. An actual face-to-face identification or the use of a former face-to-face identification, for example, by linking to the database of the General Credit Protection Agency, the SCHUFA, is needed to exclude minors. In order to exclude barred players, the name of the player has to be checked against the blacklist of the central barring system. Furthermore, providers, organizers and brokers of public games shall provide players with game-related information prior to participation in the game. There are a lot of requirements in the interstate treaty with regard to responsible gambling. The responsible gambling measures have to be described in the social concept. This is basically the framework where all the responsible gambling measures have to be described. There are a list of requirements stated in Article 6 and 7 and in other articles, and they have to be described. How your personnel is educated, that you give no credit, that minors are excluded, that only you have the sign on your homepage that minors are excluded, that minors are not, may not play, that you have to link to a helpline, and so on, so on. There are a long list. I have written it down. It's about 5 or 6 pages what requirements should be with regard to responsible gaming. I will not cover them all in detail, but I can share some knowledge on this because I have evaluated these so-called social concepts. This is another new German word for responsible gambling concept or responsible gambling measures. And in the social concept, all these measures should be described in detail and they should be evaluated after some period of time. This is the measure in the state treaty. The effectiveness of social concepts of providers offering games in the internet must be scientifically evaluated. And I have evaluated the social concept of the internet providers which had the license so far, these charity lotteries and the saving lotteries and the ones who are brokering the state-owned lotteries and so on, because they were, since 2012, they had to be evaluated, and it depends it depends on the gambling authority, but for those internet offers already in place, the gambling authorities have asked for a scientific evaluation of the effectiveness of the social concept, in some cases after 1 year, in other cases after more than 1 year. Now I'm evaluating someone who got a license in 2012. After 9 years, the gambling authority asked them to have their social concept evaluated. Given the higher addiction potential of sports betting, virtual slots, and other fast internet games, the evaluation of the social concepts of the new internet offers will be required a fortiori. It will be prescribed in the auxiliary conditions in the license when the scientific evaluation is due. I don't know when it will do. It might be due in 1 year, in 2 years, in 3 years, or even in 5 years, 6 years. It depends on the gambling authority. Organizers of online games, online poker and virtual slot machines must use an algorithm-based automatic system for early detection of gamblers at risk of gambling addiction and to prevent gambling addiction. This is part of the social concept. Each provider must use on the internet an algorithm-based automatic system, and later in the panel we will discuss this more in detail. But this is part of the social concept, and it should be, according to Article 4, it has to be evaluated scientifically. Furthermore, this is the algorithm. You have to implement an algorithm based on the account data of the player, but as well as a provider, you have to record data in the safe server. This safe server system was already established in 2012 in Schleswig-Holstein, because Schleswig-Holstein had done this own legislation and they have asked for a safe server as well. This so-called Schleswig-Holsteinisches Glücksspielauswertungssystem, GLAS, it's abbreviated GLAS, is a precursor of the new länderübergreifende Glücksspielaufsichtsbehörde. The new safe server is called LUGAS. We, a team at the Gambling Research Center at the University of Hohenheim, have just started to analyze the data available from GLAS. Technical guidelines for LUGAS are available already, and further improvements will be made. The description of the data used for the system of player protection, together with the justification for its use, should be part of the social concept. Why is a variable used and why not another variable? Not every variable will be useful. The so-called risk factors are important. These risk factors can be derived from the scientific literature on gambling addiction. For example, it is well known that being of masculine sex is a risk factor, or having a migration background is a risk factor, or having not a high-level education is a risk factor. Other risk factors are, of course, money spent, time spent, and so on. And this has to be part of this algorithm. Which data is used for the system? The player data. Then how is the data combined? For me as a researcher, a very interesting question. And if you look at the literature, which methods are used so far, it's very interesting that there are many, many methods used. But from a scientific point of view, there's a large methodological problem. Though several variables are available, it is not possible to measure the risk of gambling addiction directly. You cannot measure it directly. You cannot ask them the DSM-5 questions, and you cannot have each player going to a psychiatrist in a clinic to clarify whether he is gambling at risk or not. And this is from a methodological view, a very big problem. You cannot measure it directly. As an econometrician, of course, you will think of latent variable models where you have some indicator variables and you can measure that, but it's still a big problem. The DSM-5 criteria, the criteria which define addiction, may serve as a first guideline to identify the variables which are risk factors. But since these variables are probably correlated and have different importance, statistical methods have to be used to identify the most important variables. For this effort, multivariate methods like cluster and factor analysis and other multivariate methods like regression or logit or probit or time series like Markov chains or vector autoregressive models or other models like ARMA or RIMA can be used. We are here at the very beginning of the research. As there is yet no standard approach with regard to the identification of important variables, there is no standard approach for the method used to combine these variables which are available. We are at the very, very beginning of the research. At this stage of the scientific development, two approaches are used. One is to identify possible risk variables based on intuition or gut feeling and to formulate certain rules. If a player plays during the night, then this might be indicator of risk, and so on. You have variables and you have rules, and for example, the number of active days played in the last months, or the money spent, or another possible rule is how many a player has spent lost in the last months, and so on. The question is not only which risk variables are used and how they are combined, but as well the rules and the cutoff levels. You have to select the data, the variables. Ideally, you have variables which are not correlated to each other, but in reality, everything is correlated to everything. You have to use statistical methods to take care of this correlation between variables. And you have to have methods to detect problem gambling. There is this rule-based approach, simple rule-based approach, if-then, or you can have more sophisticated methods like Bayesian networks or like neural networks or random forests or other decision tree-based approaches. Since player behavior will change, we are often confronted with a problem in economics well known as the Lucas critique. Social science research differs from natural science research that the object of research, the human behavior, is changing. As an economist, this is always my problem. If I have a good theory and people know the good theory to predict, for example, the stock market, they will use this theory and my theory will break down because they are using this theory already and therefore it is embedded in the market. And that is the same with this system, this algorithmic system. The player will react on it and that will change their behavior and so on. The behavior of player is not a static concept, it's a dynamic concept. It evolved during time. The algorithmic system has to be supervised and controlled by humans. It makes great sense to have addiction experts involving in judging the results of the algorithmic system. Now I come already to my conclusions. we have these 3 points: the data used, the variables used, the method used, and then, of course, the intervention used. How do you intervene? Is there a pop-up? Is there a letter? Is there an email? Are there other intervention measures? But with the requirement to establish an algorithmic system of player protection and the requested subsequent evaluation of the system by scientists, providers have basically 2 options. Each provider, either providers do not want to be involved too much in the issue of player protection and hand it over to third parties, or providers regard player protection as a central issue of their business culture. Some providers seem to choose the first option, to outsource it, the player protection. Other providers seem to use the second option, to have this in the company, in the business, and to have player protection as part of the business. An important distinction has to be made between behavioral and structural prevention. And in the morning we had a lot of complaints about the 5-second duration of spin, the limit of €1,000. But you have to take care of. If within the social concept, it is regarded, there are behavioral prevention regarded. And there is a difference between behavioral prevention, like information, like other stuff, and technical or structural prevention, like the duration of a game. And the less providers put effort into the behavioral prevention, the more politicians will ask for structural prevention. And it's up to you whether in the future we will have a system where a lot of behavioral prevention will take place, informing the player, giving him possibilities, or whether the politicians will choose a system where there are a lot of technical requirements, 5 seconds, €1,000, and so on and so on. It's up to you, and therefore, of course, I would think it's better to have, to some extent, embed this responsible gambling in the company itself. In any case, with the introduction of the algorithm-based automatic system for the early detection of gamblers at risk, in the state treaty, the research in the area of player protection will gain impetus. So far, several aspects of gambling addiction have been investigated by researchers, but not in a comprehensive and cohesive manner. Now, with the requirements of this automated system, there will be some standards will be evolved. And at least from a scientific point of view, I'm very sure that this will give a great impetus to player protection and to model player protection and to look at the risk variables and how to combine them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tielman, and appreciate your insight and expertise. We'll like to know more of it in the next session where you'll be part of. So please be seated.